After 86 years of life, including 60 years as a religious, Father Solanus Casey had very little which could be called personal effects. Several days after his death in Detroit, Michigan, on July 31st, 1957, his Capuchin brothers went into his small room at St. Bonaventure's Friary to collect his things. There was a black-brimmed winter hat, a brown skull cap, some family photos, a winter overcoat, some underclothes and nightshirts, a breviary, a violin with a bow, several pictures of the Blessed Virgin, a rosary, and 2 worn habits. It was a poor man's holdings. A much larger legacy of the man did exist. It was the kind that couldn't be counted or evaluated in terms of dollars and cents. Father Solanus was ordained a priest in 1904, but he was denied the faculties to hear confessions or to give doctrinal sermons. For want of a better way to employ him, the priest was given the job of friary porter or doorkeeper. He answered the door and took messages. Gradually, however, friary visitors found something spiritually magnetic about the kind bearded priest. They began to tell him of their problems and their hopes. He reminded them of the goodness of God. He promised to pray for their needs and did so even into the loneliest hours of the night. His was a life that changed others, often after no more than a momentary meeting. His closeness to the Lord was so apparent that people of all ages, creeds, economic backgrounds, and cultures were drawn to him. The son of Irish immigrants, he was a Midwesterner from a big family who loved baseball, hot dogs with onions, and could shoot a fair game of pool. He was also a pilgrim in our own century of telephones, TVs, the Cold War, and consumerism. The special blessing of Father Solanus to American Catholics and all Christians is that he showed others that a life-giving faith and love of God could be so simple, yet so powerful. That is an excerpt from the book titled Father Solanus, The Story of Solanus Casey, OFM, Capuchin by Catherine M. Odell. The book is relatively short. It's roughly 200 pages. It's relatively simple, but really, really powerfully conveys the life and story of Father Solanus. After reading this, I am just amazed by some of the hardships and experiences that he experiences throughout his life. I'm also amazed by the highly regimented prayer life that he and his brothers in the Capuchin order keep, and then the work ethic that he demonstrates throughout his life and the humility that he demonstrates in his ministry, doing whatever it takes and trusting completely in God. One recurring theme and statement that he writes at all of the end of his letters is Deo gratias, or thanks be to God, for everything, every hardship, every struggle, and every positive thing as well. He's always saying Deo gratias, or thanks be to God. Going back to the book, so both of Father Solanus' parents immigrate to the U.S. in the late 1800s. They ultimately end up settling in the Midwest, having 16 children on a Wisconsin farm. Barney Casey, or Bernard Casey, ultimately ends up becoming Father Solanus, is the sixth of 16 children and is born on October 25th, 1870. Little Barney learned to walk in the increasingly cramped cabin. He grew used to the noise of the rolling Mississippi below the bluffs. Sound of the water was one of his earliest memories, along with the distant image of his mother hanging laundry on the lines near the house. By the age of 2, little Barney may have been paying some attention to family prayer as well. It was a nightly custom in this cabin near Prescott, Wisconsin. Slowly, he was learning to recognize certain prayers, including the prayers of the Rosary. Though he would not have understood the meaning of such a prayer, little Barney even heard the older Caseys ask for a happy death and a favorable judgment. Some impression became fixed in the consciousness of the children. Prayer was talking. Adults talked a lot. Adults talked to one another and to children. Prayer was simply talking to an unseen God. For children living on the land in the last quarter of the 19th century, there was no reason to question the reality of unseen powers. Summer storms, winter whiteouts, blazing prairie fires, abundant harvests, the flowing Mississippi River nearby, all these things were the result of great powers which could not be comprehended. So very early on, it's clear Father Solanus is raised in a faithful family. He sees daily prayer as a part of his life and his family's life. He's also keenly aware that there are many things and powers outside of his control. Like many others living on the land during that time, they're keenly aware of how dangerous nature can be. There are several stories throughout the early parts of this book that demonstrate this, like crazy stories. One where the Casey boys are chased by a bear. There's another where they have to kill a wildcat to protect their dog. They nearly lose their entire house to a prairie fire, and they lose several children, so several of Barney Casey or Father Solanus' siblings to disease within weeks of each other. So this is an unbelievably hard and unforgiving environment, but I think really this lays the foundation for Father Solanus to put his complete trust and confidence in God, really because there is no other choice. You have to survive out on the frontier in the late 1870s. Except for tending to the livestock, winters meant some time off for Midwestern farmers like Barney Casey Sr. Therefore, Casey resolved to find a way to turn the slack season to good purpose. He became a distributor of religious books and also sold subscriptions to the Irish Standard and the Extension magazine. He would travel to St. Paul by train and return with the books, heaving them off into the snowbank as the train passed near the Casey homestead. Knowing about what time the train passed through, several of the older Casey boys would pick up the canvas sack heavy with books and put it onto the wagon. Bernard Casey Sr. would walk back home from the train stop 2 miles away. I think that this story is so cool. I think that it demonstrates the type of family that he was raised in. So Father Solanus really early on sees a tremendous priority put on books, a tremendous priority put on specifically books of the faith and learning and studying these things. So much so that his father travels to another town by train, throws a sack of books off into the wilderness in hopes that his sons will find them, and then walks the 2 miles home. So this is just an amazing story that demonstrates the type of environment that he grew up in, and maybe why he develops the sort of desire to read and to study and to give his life to God. By the time he was 14, Barney was slender but strong and wiry. He had not yet completed his elementary schooling, but that was not unusual. In agricultural communities, schooling had to follow a different sort of schedule. Fields had to be planted in the spring and crops had to be harvested when the time was right. Children, especially the boys, were needed to help, and schooling had to fit around the needs of agriculture. With a disappointing harvest in 1885 and 1886, Barney's studies were pushed back even further. Along with older brothers and a sister, Barney had to look for extra work to help support the family. This is going to be a recurring theme throughout Father Solanus' life, where he has to deny himself. He has to do things for other people. So from supporting his family as a teenager like this, it shows his humility, this trust in God to do whatever it takes to support the people that he's caring for. And this is something that's going to carry him into the priesthood and into his ministry. Life was settled and satisfying for the Caseys, except for Barney. Barney began to agonize about the direction of his own life. When the family still needed financial help, Barney put concerns about his own future aside. He felt obliged to help his family, but now the family was secure again. Old questions that had preoccupied him from time to time resurfaced. Barney began to debate something that was deep in his heart. He'd done plenty of rhetorical debating in the past. This time, however, the exercise was not for fun. Ellen and Bernard Sr. weren't sure what was going on inside the handsome young man, but Barney himself was finally sure. He went to see Father Edmund Sturm, the pastor of Sacred Heart Parish in Superior, to discuss the priesthood. So at this point in time, Father Solanus has moved out of his parents' house. He's relatively successful, making money, working as a streetcar motorman. He had previously had a relatively serious girlfriend, but he's still feeling restless. He's still not feeling fulfilled. And this is ultimately what drives him to answer the call to what ends up being an over decade-long journey to the priesthood. He ends up going to a German diocesan seminary in Milwaukee, actually one of the same ones one of his older brothers went to and was dismissed from. And similar to his older brother, he actually ends up being dismissed as well. And this isn't because of failing grades or really any other reason for dismissal. It's actually a mystery at this point why he was dismissed from the seminary, although a lot of people attribute it to potentially be due to tensions between different immigrant groups during that time. And so because it was a German seminary and the Caseys were Irish, there may have been some tension there that led to the dismissal. However, this is ultimately what ends up leading him to the Capuchins and one of the three major branches of the Franciscan order. The Capuchin history was impressive, but Barney Jr. contemplated it with mixed feelings. The message about going to Detroit was not a message Barney would have been likely to invent for himself. He had been uncomfortable at the Capuchin house he visited in late spring. So this is after he's dismissed from the first seminary. He visits the Capuchins, and he's really not impressed. They didn't talk to him much. They all wore habits. They had long, untrimmed beards, but he decides to go anyways. I think that this really, really shows his complete trust and confidence in God. He hears the message to go to Detroit, and he trusts in it and follows it, despite not really feeling like he wants to. Because it was so close to Christmas, his family wanted him to stay in and spend the holiday with them. They knew it would be years before they would see him again, but Barney would not yield. It was, he insisted, time to go. Inside the monastery, men walked, talked, ate, and slept in a pattern that was hundreds of years old. The proximity of the 20th century changed life here very little. Living the monastic life, Solanus and the other friars were wrenched from sleep each day at 4:45 a.m. So Father Solanus now is with the Capuchins. He is studying to be ordained a priest, and he is approached again with a fear and risk of being dismissed. I think this goes to show just how hard it is to become a priest. It requires extreme discipline and sets a very high bar that rivals even some of like the highest levels in the military and athletics. So he is actually forced to sign a statement, which is really crazy. That is him admitting that even if he's not ordained or if he does not get the order that he wants, that he will submit and he wants to pursue this regardless. So I'll read this statement. I, Frater Solanus, Casey, declare that I join the order of the Capuchins in the province of St. Joseph with the sure intention to follow thus my religious vocation. Although I would wish and should be thankful being admitted to the ordination of a priest, considering the lack of my talents, I'd leave it to my superiors to judge on my faculties and to dispose of me as they think best. I therefore will lay no claim whatsoever if they should think of me not worthy or not able for the priesthood, and I always will humbly submit to their appointments. So he's then moved to another seminary. He continues his study for the priesthood in Milwaukee. He continues to struggle a little bit. He's not failing, but again, everything is taught at this time in German and Latin, and he's not formally trained in either, and he also doesn't have a formal training to fall back on. So he starts to struggle, not because he's stupid and not because he's not working hard, but because mostly the language barrier is very difficult. So he's again approached with the possibility of dismissal, and this statement is also just insane and goes to show how much he has to trust in God and how willing he is to do whatever it takes to answer this calling. I, Frater Solanus Casey, have entered the order with a pure intention and of my own free choice, wish to remain in the order, and I therefore humbly ask for admission to solemn profession. However, since I do not know whether as a result of my meager talents and defective studies I am fit to assume the many-sided duties and serious responsibilities of the priesthood, I hereby declare that I do not want to become a priest if my legitimate superiors consider me unqualified, and that I wish to be able to receive one or other of the orders, but will be satisfied if they exclude me entirely from the higher orders. I have offered myself to God without reservation. For that reason, I leave it without anxiety to the superiors to decide about me as they judge best before God. This is amazing determination and grit and faith that it takes for him to press on at this point. He's now been approached with the possibility of being dismissed from seminary 3 times, but he knows this calling. God has put this on his heart, and he's going to pursue it no matter what. So at this point, he's in his 30s. He's been pursuing the priesthood since he was 21. He is finally ordained. They finally decide to ordain him, but he's ordained as simplex priest. The simplex priests are not able to hear confessions or preach homilies for their congregations. This must have been unbelievably painful for Father Solanus. He's fully a priest, but he is at a minimum partially diminished by what he's able to contribute as a priest and to his community. Regardless, he trusts and submits to his superiors, who trusts and has confidence in God and presses forward, and even says Deo gratias, thanks be to God. So his first assignment is in New York, and it is to act as a supervisor to altar boys and to be a porter, which is essentially answering the door when the bell is rung and greeting visitors. So over his 10-year journey to be a priest, he probably has dreams and things that he wants to accomplish, and yet he is humbled immediately and takes the assignment with complete humility to literally answer the door and oversee the altar boys. Seeing to it that the boys served well on the altar was a good share of his priestly assignment. Solanus Casey had decided years before that he was not going to do any part of his given jobs with less than 100% devotion. So he's transferred to several different parishes in New York, but his ministry really starts to take off when he arrives in Harlem, New York. He's given the role to oversee the Seraphic Mass Association, which is essentially a place where people come to donate, and they donate to support the Capuchins and the Franciscan order, but then they bring prayer intentions and things that they would like the Capuchins to pray for. So Father Solanus is responsible for running this, for answering the door, and then writing down people's prayer intentions. But this starts to develop more than just being a bookkeeper. He starts to listen to people, he starts to counsel people, and people start to really seek out his counsel. So much so that they ask him to hear their confessions. He really humbly always simply declines, doesn't give any reason, and just asks them to seek out another priest, which again is just further solidifying this amazing humility and trust in God, that he is doing what he should be and that he trusts his superiors. So this is now back in Detroit. He's transferred back to St. Bonaventure's. By the early autumn of 1924, Brother Francis and Father Solanus both saw that the visitor lines at St. Bonaventure's were getting longer as the days went by. Most of the visitors, it seemed, wanted to talk or meet with Father Solanus. Others who heard about the work Father Solanus had done in New York were not at all surprised by the lines. So he developed such a reputation in New York that there are lines. So many people are showing up to receive his counsel. And this follows when he goes back to Detroit. He's again running the same Seraphic Mass Association, giving people counsel, and those lines follow him. And this is when people start to claim and attribute healings to Father Solanus. So people claim and have experienced healings, everything from broken bones to marriage issues to healings of their sight to cancer. And so much so, there are so many instances of people claiming to have been healed by Father Solanus that they ask him, his superiors ask him to start recording every instance of his prayers and then the claims of people that they were healed. So this actually begins to become a problem. So many people are following Father Solanus and coming to receive his counsel that his superiors move him to a rural monastery in Huntington, Indiana. The phone would ring continually, and almost every time the party at the other end of the line asked to speak with Father Solanus. The doorbell, too, was ringing constantly for him. Cars came from almost every state in the Union and from Canada. He took his time with each person who came to him and listened to their problems. So at this point, to deal with the sheer volume of the letters he's receiving as a result of him now having a rural assignment, because he's developed all these relationships with people in New York and in Detroit, they're writing him letters. They still desire so strongly to receive his counsel that they're all writing him letters, and they're in such volume that his superiors assign him an assistant just to get through all of them. In the course of the day, I would receive the answers he had crashed out on an old battered typewriter. They were mostly typed on 3x5 cards. The spelling was bad, pure 5th grade stuff, but the contents simply amazed me. With a few words, he's able to come to the heart of a problem. His understanding of people, his sympathetic response, his grasp of theology just astounded me. So throughout his later years, Father Solanus, of course, continues his ministry, continues to develop this following. Wherever he goes, people seek him out. They're magnetically drawn to him, his knowledge and his counsel, and really his holiness. But he starts to struggle with a skin disease that causes significant and painful inflammation in his legs. He bears this with tremendous courage, never complains, never even changes his routine, still getting up extremely early, still serving his community no matter what, and still getting up at all hours of the middle of the night and going wherever the people need him to. But this disease really starts to cause a lot of pain later in his life, and ultimately is what causes him to go to the hospital. "My whole body hurts, thanks be to God," he said. It was very clear to everyone that he was accepting this final and unremitting pain with Christian joy. So after struggling for a very long time with this disease, it's ultimately what causes him to go to the hospital. And it causes him to go to the hospital many times. And at this point, later in his life, it is clear that he's not going to recover this time. So as nurses enter his room, this is going back to the book here, it seemed as if Solanus might be dozing, but then they noticed that he was whispering something they could not understand. The orderly supported his head and shoulders as the nurse pulled his hospital gown over his shoulders in order to bathe him. Suddenly, the blue eyes opened wide and Father Solanus stretched out his arms. "I give my soul to Jesus Christ," he said clearly. The eyes closed and he fell backward a bit, exhaling his last breath. So that's where I'll leave it in regards to the book. Father Solanus was an amazing man who demonstrated tremendous humility, demonstrated a willingness to do whatever it took in every area of his life, demonstrated extreme and admirable holiness to pursue God's will no matter what, and really had an unparalleled and unprecedented trust and confidence in God despite the many setbacks and pain and hardships that he experiences throughout his life. So he's actually currently in the process of being canonized a saint, potentially. He, in 1995, Pope John Paul II declared him venerable, and in 2017, after various miracles that were attributed to Father Solanus were verified and confirmed by the church, they announced that Venerable Solanus would be beatified, and roughly 70,000 people gathered in Detroit to celebrate this Mass in 2017 of Blessed Solanus Casey. So now to leave you with some words from Blessed Father Solanus Casey. "Life is to live and life is to give, and talents to use for good if you choose. Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger. Do not pray for tasks equal to your powers. Pray for powers equal to your task. Then the doing of your work shall be no miracle, but you shall be a miracle. Every day you shall wonder at yourself at the richness of life, which has come to you by the grace of God." Again, this book is Father Solanus, The Story of Solanus Casey, OFM Capuchin by Catherine M. Odell. It's a great book. I highly recommend getting it if you want to learn more. It has many more stories and many more details that I didn't cover here. And I'll leave a link in the description of the podcast. And if you use that link, you'll be supporting the podcast as well. Thank you guys so much, and God bless.